Monday, Yud Gimel Cheshvan, Tovshin Ayin Zayin. We're in Teres Menachem, Sefer HaMamorim, Tovshin Yud Gimel. In the Maimer of Basi Legani, Tovshin Yud Gimel, we are on page Pei Daled. The Rebbe explained over here, it's just middle of explaining how the neshamas of all Yidden, in the sense of the etzem neshama, of the pint of the Yid, of the nitzutz boirei, the spark of the Creator that's inserted within the spark of the created, in the Yechida, that all Yidden are equal, despite the fact that the sheirish and neshama, the source of souls, is from Kelim, and Kelim denotes fragmentation, and higher, that's the Kelim of Atzilus, and higher yet, souls, neshamas, are from the quarry of souls of Ak, Adam Kadmon, that are garments to the quarry of Sfiris. So again, that would seem to denote some form of notional Hischalkos, however that might be in Ak. Nevertheless, being that they are fused, we're talking about Pnimius HaKelim, the inner dimension of the Kelim, in Atzilus, which is fused with the inner dimension of the Eir of Atzilus. And similarly, when we talk about Ak, despite the fact that it's Chitzonius Ak, but Chitzonius Ak is fused with Pnimius Ak, with the inner dimension of Ak, and the inner dimension of Ak, within there you have that which is higher than the Eiris. So therefore, the bottom line is that it all goes back to the very etzem, to the essence, and therefore embedded within each and every soul of every Yid at the highest level is this nitzutz beirei, this spark of the Creator, and therefore all Yidden are equal in the sense that when that comes to the fore, for example, in a state of Mesiras Nefesh, when of self-sacrifice, when one's basic Yiddishkeit is threatened, it breaks through all boundaries, and a Yid gives away his life for Hashem. We're in the middle of now, the Rebbe is now elaborating on this concept of Ak, of Adam Kadmon, that even there, there is the aspect of the fusion with the Pnimius. We are 4 lines from the top, on page Pei Daled, by the full stop of Mavur. So I started explaining at the end of last year that which the Alter Rebbe explains in the Maimer Lamnatzeich Alashminis in Likutei Torah Pashas Tazria concerning Milah. Why Milah is higher? Why circumcision? Milah is higher than Shabbos. Where do we see that? We see that when the 8th day of when the 8th day falls out, the 8th day of the birth falls out, after the birth falls out on Shabbos. In other words, if the baby is born on Shabbos, the boy is born on Shabbos, then the 8th day is the following Shabbos. Then the bris would push off Shabbos. You would do the bris on Shabbos, the circumcision on Shabbos, despite the fact that under normal circumstances, the surgical procedures, as it were, that we perform at a bris, are prohibited on Shabbos in the normal course of things. Why is Milah? In other words, Milah is greater than Shabbos. Why is that? Because Shabbos has an association with Chitzonius Ak, whereas Milah, circumcision, reaches all the way to Pnimius Ak, to the inner dimension of Ak. When you reach the dimension of the Pnimius of Ak, the inner dimension of Ak, that's higher than Shabbos, and therefore those things that are prohibited on Shabbos are not prohibited so far as Milah is concerned. We find an interesting thing on concerning Milah, that despite the fact that Milah is greater than Shabbos, if the baby is 8 days old at the circumcision, then there must be one Shabbos that passes with the baby being born before it has the bris. Why is that? If we're going to Pnimius Ak, higher than Shabbos, why is it necessary to have one Shabbos in the middle? It seems to denote, in the spiritual sense, that we need to have the benefits of Shabbos in order to arrive at Milah. We need to have the benefits of chitzonius ak, the external dimension of ak, in order to arrive where? To the pnimius ak. Says the Rebbe, that's exactly the point. Because the chitzonius ak, the idea is to draw it down. So the chitzonius ak is fused with the pnimius ak. And through that process of its fusion, chitzonius ak ultimately, when we reach pnimius ak, the chitzonius ak ultimately is united with the highest levels as well. That is also why the Rebbe says, based on this Likutei Torah, why it rains on Shabbos, for example. What does that mean? If you remember, I mentioned the Medrash where Turnus Rufus asked Rabbi Akiva if your God is so concerned about Shabbos and he prohibited all these different tasks to be performed on Shabbos, watering, sowing, planting, plowing, etc., why does he allow the winds to blow? Why does he make the winds blow on Shabbos? Why does he make rain fall? And why does he make grass grow? And Rabbi Akiva answered him, if two people live in a courtyard, they need an eruv chatzeres, they need to make an eruv in order to be able to carry there. If one person lives there, he doesn't need an eruv because it's his own courtyard. He's allowed to carry without an eruv. So too, the whole world is Hashem's domain. So he's allowed to do what he likes. So the question is, why? How did he answer that? He answered only so far as carrying haitzah. But what does that have to do with rain and with grass growing and with wind blowing? That has nothing to do with. I'm not allowed to plant or water the grass in my own garden, even if there's nobody else living there. How does that answer the question of Turnus Rufus? So the Alter Rebbe goes on and explains that what happens is there is an element of ak, at least chitzonius ak, or chitzonius ak, that remains present in the world on Shabbos. In other words, or that is present in the world and that remains on Shabbos as well. Meaning to say, the Alter Rebbe explains what happens on Shabbos. On Shabbos there is an aliyah. The world ascends, right? Everything ascends to a higher level. It all ascends to where? To Atzilus. The life force of the world ascends to Atzilus. Right? Which aspect of the world, or of the world, ascends to Atzilus? The Pnimius, the inner dimension. How is that? Because if you look at the physical world remains intact. So what ascends? We don't see any change in the actual physical world on Shabbos. Why is that? Because it's the Chayas, it's the Pnimius of the world that ascends to where? To Atzilus. So if that's the case, how does the world continue to exist? Asks the Alter Rebbe there in Likutei Torah. So he explains that there is an element of ak. It says raglei ak b'asiyah. The feet of ak, as it were, the last dimension of Adam Kadmon, is present in asiyah. He gives an example of skin. That element of ak that's present in the world is like the skin that covers the body. The skin is there all the time, right? Similarly, this dimension of ak, this life energy of ak, which has to do with the actual external aspect of the world, that's present in the world all the time. There's no change in that. Because it's Adam Kadmon, it's at the highest level and at the lowest level equally. Therefore, and as I mentioned yesterday, he refers in the Maimer to ak as keser. So in general terms, we have the pnimi, which would be Atzilus and down, and then you have that which is beyond, which he refers to as Adam Kadmon, as keser. That element, that transcendent element, remains in the world present all the time. That's the chitzonius element. The pnimius element would be the pnimi, the inner energy of the world, which ascends. So that ascends on Shabbos to Atzilus, whereas the external dimension remains. Therefore, when it comes to looking and seeing the external world, you don't see any change, because that remains constant. What goes up higher is the pnimi, is Atzilus. So therefore, he says, so Shabbos, there is this aspect of chitzonius ak, right? The external dimension of ak, through which, when an infant passes through one Shabbos between its birth and the milah, and the circumcision, once it ascends through milah taps in, or is bestowed upon from above, the inner dimension of ak, it fuses with the chitzonius ak. So the point that Rebbe is trying to make is that when there is this fusion, despite the fact that it's a lower level, the lower level retains an association with the inner dimension of the level with which it is fused. Just like the Kalim of Atzilus are fused with the Pnimius Ha'er, so to Chitzenius Ak is fused with Pnimius Ak, and through that it's fused, as he said before, with which the inner dimension is fused. And because the inner dimension is fused with the Etzem, it retains this Etzemness, as it were, this essentialness, and therefore inserted within every Neshama is the Nitzutz Beire, the spark of the Creator, which remains constant and is equal by every Yid. And therefore, despite the fact that the source, the actual source from where it is born, is from an external dimension, whether it's Kalim or Chitzenius Ak, depending on which level you speak, nevertheless, there is no fragmentation, there's no difference between one Neshama and another in this aspect, in the etzemness of the soul. That's the point that Rebbe makes. Let's see what the Rebbe says inside now. 4 lines from the top on page Pedal. The Commission of Rebbe Lekut Torah, Dibrat Amas Chalam Tzei Chalash Minis, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Lekut Torah. In the Maimer that begins on the words Lavan Tzei Chalash Minis, it's a verse in Tehillim which talks about Lavan Tzei Chalash Minis, and it's concerning Milah, circumcision in the inner sense. Shehamilah Hilamayla Mishabes, the Alter Rebbe explains that circumcision is higher than Shabbos. Why? Because the Shabbos who Shivas Yemei Hekef. Shabbos is associated with and is part of the cycle of 7 days of the week. The number 7. Ukshomim Yerdim b'Shabbos. And rain falls on Shabbos. That's a reference to the Medrash that I just elaborated upon. Shehu inyan chitzenius ak. That is what? That has an association with what? With the external dimension of ak, of Adam Kadmon. Umila pnimius ak. Mila is associated with the inner dimension of Adam Kadmon, Shulamayla Shabbos, which is higher than Shabbos. That's why it's 8 rather than 7, right? 8 denotes a notch up, not only one notch up, but way beyond the level that's represented in Shabbos. And what is that? Because Shabbos is associated with Chitzenius Adam Kadmon, and Mila is associated with circumcision with Pnimius Adam Kadmon, the inner dimension of Adam Kadmon. That is why the infant has to have one Shabbos that passes before he can be circumcised. Why? Because you have to go through Chitzenius Ak, the external dimension of Ak, in order to arrive where? To the inner dimension of Adam Kadmon. Nevertheless, we see, despite the fact that Milah is what? Circumcision is higher than Shabbos, in the sense that it has an association with the inner dimension of Adam Kadmon, and that is denoted in the number 8, which is higher than 7. Nevertheless, it has an association to Shabbos as well, which is the external dimension of Ak, and that is why it has to pass through a Shabbos. It has to have the experience of a Shabbos. Through the fact that the infant goes through one Shabbos, which in the inner dimension, in the inner sense, it represents the external dimension of Adam Kadmon. Efsher liis inyan amila, then only it's then possible that the child should have this idea of circumcision. And what does that mean in the inner dimension? Shehu pnimius Adam Kadmon, the bestowal of the energy from the inner dimension of Adam Kadmon. So we see that the chitzenius and the pnimius are associated with one another. The K'meikin, so too it'll be understood Gam B'Shei Rishon Neshamas, also concerning the source of souls. The Av Sheshor Shemu Mechitzenius Adam Kadmon, although the souls are rooted where? In the external dimension of Adam Kadmon, as we mentioned before, the quarry of souls are a garment to the quarry of Spheres. So in other words, to the attributes of Adam Kadmon. So therefore, the source of souls is in the external dimension of Adam Kadmon. Nevertheless, they are still united with the inner dimension of Adam Kadmon. And because of that, because they are united with the inner dimension of Adam Kadmon, primordial man, what does that mean? Therefore, whatever the inner dimension of Adam Kadmon is associated with, is in turn also associated with what? With the external dimension of Adam Kadmon. And according to this, it'll be understood why it is in the nature of every Jew that he cannot be separated from godliness. Why? And it's called Yisrael. That's the word. All Jews, whether it's the greatest of the great or the smallest of the small. Because since ultimately they're all rooted where? The source of all souls is rooted in the very essence of Hashem. And the soul is, so to speak, in the image of Hashem, similar to Hashem. And it's obviously self-understood that when we talk about the essence, there is no room at all for anything other than godliness, and that is where souls are ultimately rooted. And through the process just described, that connection and purity is retained, that essentialness is retained. Lochen beteva kol Yisrael. That is why it's in the nature of every yid. She'eni yochel is nifred b'shum eifin alakus, that he cannot be separated from godliness under any circumstances. When we talk about what the yechida, why then is it possible for a yid to transgress? That is because of the Ruach Shtus, which the Rebbe is going to elaborate more upon in chapter 6, and as explained before, on the Etzem HaNefesh, however, there is no concealment of the Ruach Shtus, and we will continue Mitzvah Shem tomorrow.